Hi everyone, happy Friday. Excited to have another Instagram live chat with you. And I'm going to have my guest join me. Hello.
Hi, how are
Hi.
you?
I'm good, Genesis. How are you? So good to have you here.
It's my pleasure to be here. I'm well, thank you.
And we are on such different end of the coast. You're joining me here from Florida,
Yes.
and I'm here in LA, but we have a really interesting and exciting topic to talk about in terms of relevance. But before we dive into our topic, would you please introduce yourself to our Instagram community?
Yes. My name is Genesis Gomez, and I'm a licensed mental health counselor here in Florida. I primarily work with clients ages like 18 to 34, so young adults and millennials. And I see them individually as a couple, or as in the context of family therapy. I like to say that I work from a relationship perspective, and I help people navigate life transitions in their relationships. So I see a lot of college students that maybe have to come back home because mental health issues have arisen and they're readjusting to living with their parents again after being away and managing those dynamics. I work with people that are struggling with the dating world. I work with couples that are maybe interested in premarital counseling or in are getting ready to become new parents and want to process that transition and gain tools. So just a bit of a variety, but I would say that the best way to condense it is life transitions and relationships.
Yes, you have so many talents, you have so many skills, but specifically today, I'm looking forward to learning from you in terms of your relationship expertise and really talk about the way that our relationships are being affected by the quarantine, specifically the breakups that are still, the relationships can end during this time. And what I
Mhm.
want to start with is asking you a little bit about what are the typical challenges we experience during a breakup before pre-quarantine? What were the typical challenges, difficult things about breakups?
I think that every breakup is different.
Mm-hmm.
And no two breakups are the same. It just really depends on the nature of the relationship. But some of the typical things that come up are intrusive and obsessive thoughts, where we're
Mm-hmm.
constantly thinking about the other person. We're constantly replaying arguments. We're replaying the way that the breakup happened, whether it was through a call or in person or through text. We're kind of like rereading the text. We're replaying all these scenarios in our mind.
Mm-hmm.
We are kind of stuck in that. What I also see is this constantly trying to reach out. And that may be texting the person, that may be calling the person, that may be going on social media and liking or commenting on their posts, or maybe just looking to see what they're doing on social media. Do they have new photos with people? Are they partying? Are they dating someone new? But this is constantly, it's a very persistent way of connecting, right? And
Oh,
we can
yes.
make all sorts of excuses for, well, I just want to make sure they're okay. Or,
Mm.
I still have this book. They may want this book really bad. Let me let them know that I have their book, right?
Yeah.
But there's this persistent need to continue to have a connection with them. And then another thing that I often see is some unhealthy behaviors to try to cope with these feelings. So if we're having these obsessive and intrusive thoughts, and then we're trying to constantly connect with them, as you could imagine, that can create very intense emotions, especially if the other person is not trying to engage with us, right? That can create a lot of frustration and a lot of anxiety, and we can feel very abandoned. Our self-worth takes a dip down, and so no one likes to feel that way. So in trying to soothe the pain, a lot of times we can engage in unhealthy behaviors, like where maybe we're overeating, or we're restricting our food,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe we're exercising way too much, or maybe we're drinking too much, or we're using drugs, or we're engaging in risky sexual behaviors, just as a way to numb the pain and to kind of stop that cycle.
And I love everything you're sharing because they are so true. There's so much spectrum. There are a variety of responses
Mhm.
that we all obviously react to life experiences. And I noticed that That's interesting how somebody said it's like the watching phase. You can kind of like still get to know about what they're doing. And I wonder, 20
Yes.
years ago when there were breakups, we didn't get to have that temptation or that access to what's happening with their social media accounts. And what I wanted to specifically talk a little bit about is how are breakups changing or being experienced impacted during the coronavirus. For an example, I always wonder that, breaking up via phone, breaking up via text message is rude and insensitive and says a lot about the one who's doing the breaking up. But now with the quarantine, is that become the new normal? Is it okay to break up via text now or via phone call?
I mean, I think it's still as painful and as difficult for the person on the receiving end. Just because we're in quarantine doesn't mean that that's not going to impact us. It's probably the healthiest way for physical health. But it's definitely still painful. It leaves still the other person with a lot of questions, especially if the other person didn't see it coming. I think that sometimes we know when a relationship is going south and maybe we don't want to accept it, but we deep down know it. But there's some times where one of the partners is just completely blindsided.
And that's very difficult. And that's what I was wondering, is the quarantine, when we have a little bit of alone time by ourselves, are we having, are those deep emotions are resurfacing up? Like, I wasn't happy in this relationship, but I was kind of like repressing that. And now that I have this quiet alone time, it's coming up to the surface and I can't deny it. This is not the right relationship for me. How do you think couples might handle if they're living together and they decided to break up?
I think that's really challenging because you really have to be really good about being able to set boundaries and kind of be able to give each other space. Because if we're still living under the same roof and we're still interacting and we're still like having breakfast together and we're still in each other's space, we could have said that we broke up, but our behaviors are staying differently, right? And so psychologically, it's hard to go through the process of grief when we're still in constant interaction with the other person, when our rituals and our routines have not drastically changed. So we need to be mindful of creating boundaries that are going to help us protect each other and not blur the lines, not get confused, right?
Yes.
And then we also have to keep in mind that right now we just need to survive, right? Like we're kind of in survival mode. And so it's not like people can just move out and can find a new place. And probably in most areas in the US, that's not realistic right now. And we don't know when that's going to be a possibility. So really the task has to be survival. How can we go through this together, but separate, and ensure that we're physically and mentally healthy in the process? So I would encourage people to have that conversation. This is not about getting back together. This is not about whether there's hope for us in the future or whether we want to try couples therapy in the future. That's a conversation that can be had after quarantine is over. But right now, the main task has to be getting through this together, but separate.
Oh, I love that. And that's such a respectful way of recognizing each other's needs. And I know people are also kind of listening into you and talking about the importance of boundaries, but also the challenges. And you're saying communication is a way to set those boundaries, correct?
Yes.
Any communication tips specifically you would recommend for people to really practice?
I think that first of all, we have to be mindful of our emotions. A lot of times what gets in the way of proper communication or healthy communication is that we're flooded with emotions, right? So if you just heard about this breakup, you need to give yourself some time to feel those emotions, to process that. Maybe talk to someone, maybe journal, maybe take a really warm bath, go for a run if you're able to go for a run, but do something to help you ground yourself and go through those emotions. And when you're ready to do that, invite the other person to have this conversation. Don't hold them hostage. Don't force them to have that conversation right then and there. They may still be flooded with emotions themselves, and they may need some more time to process that. But invite them to this conversation and keep it very practical. There's a lot of emotions that come up when a relationship ends, and they're all valid. They're all natural. However, right now, again, we're in survival mode. So we have to keep it factual and we have to keep it practical. The facts are that you're stuck together in this home, cohabitating for a couple more weeks. And
Mhm.
while you have to cohabitate together, how are we going to do this in a way that works for the two of us, where we're protecting each other physically and mentally?
That is very true in terms of it got me thinking the wise mind technique from dialectical
Yes.
behavioral therapy, where
Yes.
you integrate your logical mind, like you said, the practical, but also our emotions. And I know you spoke about it earlier that relationship breakups bring up a lot of emotions, and that
Mm-hmm.
emotions are not going to be any different now that we're in quarantine. I think
Mm-hmm.
I hear you say that you need to find a way to explore your emotions, accept them, and feel your
Mm-hmm.
feelings. As we say as therapists, there's
Mm-hmm.
no way out but through. You have to feel
Yes.
those feelings. And journaling is a great one. Do you recommend any gratitude list, any meditation, any other like walk, self care skills that could be helpful during this time?
Absolutely. Anything that revolves around self-compassion, I think is very important. I think those are one of the things that we lose when a relationship becomes toxic or when there's a breakup, is that self-compassion. A lot of
Mm,
times we blame ourselves for what happened. Again, when we're replaying these arguments and these scenarios, we think, well, if I had said this and this wouldn't have happened, or if I had shown up to that, or whatever, a lot of what ifs, right? And then a lot of
yes.
times in those what ifs, we blame ourselves. And
Mm,
there's where, again, that self compassion becomes non existent. So, anything that can help promote self compassion, that can help us change that narrative, that voice that we have inside our head, would be really positive. So, for that, I would suggest reading books on self compassion. I would suggest, again, the journaling. And maybe as you're journaling and you recognize that negative and blaming self talk, going back and correcting that is a way of kind of ingraining that. I would also suggest meditation. I would definitely suggest gratitude. I think that a lot of times we can focus just on what's in front of us and not see the big picture. And when we think of gratitude, it forces us to see the big picture. I would definitely recommend that you talk to someone. Find
mhm.
someone that you trust. Find someone that is not going to be judgmental. Find someone that's going to be understanding, that it's not necessarily going to take sides, but it's willing to hear you out. Because I think one of the main things, probably not just with breakups, with anything, is not isolating, and it's not keeping yourself enclosed with your pain. And
Mm.
now it's very easy to isolate, right? We're basically isolating to stay alive. So it's really important to be proactive about reaching out to your support system and connecting with people, texting people, having Zoom dates with your friends, and just finding a way to connect with others, not keeping that inside.
And I love the accountability here. You're bringing up how we are responsible to be proactive because,
Yes.
as you said, we are asked to be physically distant from other people, but that doesn't mean we need to be emotionally distant and emotionally
Mm-hmm.
disconnected, especially during a difficult experience like a breakup. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I want to go back to something also you mentioned, that typically when we're going through breakups, we do have unhealthy coping skills such as,
Mm-hmm.
comforting our emotions through eating or,
Mm-hmm.
engaging alcohol use to numb some of that
Mm-hmm.
feeling. And we may also, want to be left alone and isolate. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, what we're seeing is that this quarantine is already bringing up some of those urges. People, there are these comments that, quarantine 15 instead of, the
Mm-hmm.
freshman 15. So we're already
Yes.
noticing that people are having these urges to eat more than usual, drink more than usual, and then
Mm-hmm.
the breakups happen. So what are anything different, or should continue to practice those coping skills to manage some of the unhealthy coping skills you just mentioned?
I think all of the coping skills we've talked about can definitely help. But if we know that there's something specifically that we struggle with, whether it's alcohol, or it's eating too much or restricting our eating, or if there's anything specific that maybe we already have a history with, and we know that that's kind of
Um,
our go to when we're not emotionally well, let's talk to someone and let's tell them, look, this is usually what I do. This is how I self soothe or I self medicate to not feel those feelings. And I don't want to go back to that. I know that that hasn't played out well for me in the past. So I definitely don't want to go back to that. Will you hold me accountable? Will you ask me? Will you check up with me? Will you FaceTime me? I think that's the best way to kind of be proactive about holding ourselves accountable and bringing someone else into the mix. I love the idea about accountability partners, and it's a little bit more challenging now, but there's still ways of including other people in our process.
Yes, and I hear that people can individualize this experience for them by really remembering some of their past tendencies and be mindful of what to look out for. As you said, for some person it could be eating too much, or the other person it could be sleeping too much. So I guess maybe paying attention to your personal tendencies and getting help for those specific things. And you really gave great ideas about all these virtual resources that's available. And before I let you go, I would like you to explain to people how they can use online therapy. What are some of the ways, I think, benefits of online therapy to address specific breakup heartache, breakup pain?
Yes. So I think it's really important to recognize that right now, if you're going through a breakup, you're likely experiencing two different types of trauma ongoingly. So you're living through this pandemic, which is kind of this collective trauma that we're all in right now. And it's an ongoing trauma. It hasn't ended. We don't know when it's going to end. And then you're also going through this breakup, which is also this ongoing thing that you're experiencing, right? This takes a toll on one's mental health. It definitely does. People whose lives were quote unquote perfect before this pandemic, nothing extraordinary were happening in their lives, are struggling with being quarantined and are struggling with the changes in their schedule and are struggling with like finances and concerned about their health or the health of their loved ones, and that's causing them anxiety, that's causing them stress, all of these different things. Right now, when you add a breakup into this mix, when you add the grief and all of the emotions that come with a breakup, that's a lot for someone to handle by themselves. So I think it's important to take advantage of the fact that most therapists are offering teletherapy now, and it's probably the best time because most people are again at home quarantined. So you don't have to worry about commuting. You don't have to worry about, oh, I have to work and I have to do, and I have to go to school and I have to do these things. Like, you can really schedule it around whatever's going on in your life right now. That's not an excuse anymore. You can do it from the comfort of your home. You can do it from your car. If you live with other people and you don't want them to like over here, you live in tight spaces, you can go to your car and do it. You wear headphones and it keeps it pretty confidential. But I definitely think it's important to think about, what do you want your mental health to look like throughout this quarantine and even after the quarantine? Do you want to be in the space that you are now, or possibly a worse space? Or do you want to be in a better space?
And I love how you're recognizing and validating two levels of emotion people might be experiencing. As you said, globally, we're going through such a big unknown, and there's the stress, the anxiety, trauma of it. And also on a personal level, if you're struggling and going through a breakup, you will be experiencing your personal emotions. So there's these two levels of stress, and I think how you explained it was very normalizing, very validating, and hopefully that really encourage people to utilize online therapy in their personal growth, in their recovery from this chapter of their lives. So before I let you go, would you let people know how they can contact you? I know you offer online therapy, so they can reach out to you.
Yes. You can go to my website, themiamitherapist.com. You can also follow me on Instagram. My handle is The Miami Therapist. And I'd be happy to talk to anyone who's in Florida and is interested in teletherapy at this point. I provide a complimentary 15-minute consultation just to ensure that we're a good fit. I'm also providing a free online course on healthy relationships that can be found on my website, themiamitherapist.com.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Genesis, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I really appreciate it. I know it's coming to the end of the week, but I learned so much from our conversation. I know our audience benefited too. Thank you again for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really a pleasure talking about this.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.